Welcome to the Kent Lapp Podcast.
Cool, Schafer. Welcome to the podcast.
Dude, happy to be here, man.
Did I hit your last name right?
Yes,
Schafer?
you said it. You said it perfectly.
Okay, fantastic. So I love your writing. You got some skills. Here's
Thanks, man.
what. So I would assume with your writing that you take on the persona of whatever brand you're writing for, right? So it's not like if you're writing, because I know you've done some work for Entrepreneur and was it Hustler?
The Hustle.
The Hustle. Onnit. So like if you're going to write for Onnit, for example, you're writing in the Onnit brand, right? You're writing out of the Onnit brand, not necessarily just writing like Cool Schafer writes, right? But your personal writing. Like if someone was like, "Hey, how would you describe his writing?" I don't know how you've heard people describe it, but like I would have to say, all right, it's a blend of like darkness with expectancy, with like this this optimism, kind of like this humility, like darkness and expectancy and humility all sort of blended together. It's really exceptional.
Thank you.
Is this just a talent that you've had kind of forever, or is this something you've just worked really hard to develop?
So that's a great question. So I got into writing when I turned 22. It was right after I had graduated from the University of Southern Indiana. And I actually went to school for marketing.
I saw that.
Yeah.
How old are you now, by the way?
I am 26.
Okay. All right. So you didn't start writing seriously until 22?
Yeah, it wasn't until 22. And it was kind of a strange sort of story, but I graduate from the University of Southern Indiana, get a degree in marketing, and I go and work at this advertising agency in my hometown. And I'm going to say 2 to 3 days in, I just realized I was a terrible employee. And sort of an aside, there's a funny story on Dennis Rodman where one day he's in a Pistons practice and an assistant coach is just really chewing him out. And Chuck Daly says, "Hey, come over here. And the assistant coach comes over and he says to the assistant coach, you got to stop doing that. Just let him be. You can't put a saddle on a Mustang." And so while I'm never going to be the person that's going to kick a photographer in his nuts, I'm definitely that resonates with me. And so I'm in this agency, and I kind of feel like I'm a Mustang with a saddle on him. And I don't know if you've ever been in a place where you just want to leave, but I'm just itching to get out of there. And one day I just stand up and leave, which I don't recommend doing. I don't think that's very polite. So I leave. I text my boss and I say, "Hey, I'd love to have a meeting tomorrow to put in my 2 weeks." And we part on good terms. And so I leave there.
And this is a few days in or a few weeks in?
Few weeks in.
Okay.
Maybe a month in, tops, right?
Okay.
So I leave there, and there's another funny saying where you're not punished for your sins, you're punished by them. And so the same hard ass that leaves the advertising agency with his college degree, he's now working construction from like 6 a.m. to 2 p.m. So from 2 p.m. till like 8 p.m. he can follow his dreams as a writer. And so I'm waking up at the crack of dawn and I'm going into these old apartment buildings, and my job is to tear out carpets from these apartments. And I don't know if you've ever done that, but it's just nasty work. And
yes.
So these apartments just reeked of cat piss and.
Dude, I know what you're talking about. Yeah. My mom had apartments when I was a kid, and I cleaned them a lot. I repainted them a lot. Carpeting was above my level, but I tore some out before. There's something about an apartment smell. If people don't really kind of stay on top of it, it's a very distinct smell that you'd never forget.
Oh, it's nasty.
Yeah, it's real nasty.
And food and poop and just stuff gets caked into that carpet that just never goes away. And I remember one day I'm like tearing out carpet and I look down and there's just used needles on the floor. And from that point on, I'm wearing these thick leather gloves as I'm tearing out this carpet. And so I do this for a year, and I pursue writing at night. But the really humbling moment and kind of full circle on that, you're punished by your sins, not for them. My advertising agency decides to do a renovation, and they hire my construction company.
Dude, can you imagine?
Yeah. So they hire my
You were there a
construction
month
company.
and you left.
I leave.
But did you leave like, do you guys suck, I'm out of here? Or did you leave like, guys, I'm so sorry. I love you so much. Like, but I just have to leave. Like, how was the leaving?
I left on good terms. I mean, and my boss was great. She's a really bright advertising mind. And so I left on really good terms. As good of terms as you can when you quit, right? I mean, but so I find myself back in there and I'm tearing out carpet, and my coworkers are passing me as I'm in work boots covered in dust, tearing out carpet. And I know what they're thinking. They're thinking, what the hell is this kid doing?
Yeah.
And I wanted to cry. Like, I was just tearing out carpet and I wanted to cry. And it was a really humbling moment, but it also made me realize that I was doing exactly what I wanted to be doing, because for some reason, tearing out carpet and knowing I was pursuing my dreams as a writer was less painful than sitting in that advertising agency.
Yes.
In the air conditioning, typing away at the computer and doing something I didn't love.
Yep.
So yeah, I just kept hustling, and about a year into tearing out carpet, all of a sudden I kind of started popping off as a writer and started writing for Onnit, and I don't write for them anymore. That's like moved into Bowflex. So now like I do Bowflex's voice, and
Bowflex.
Bowflex, like the so they also own Nautilus, the equipment.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. And so, man, it's just been a wild ride.
Yeah. So the thing of, let's touch on that Dennis Rodman thing a little bit, because I think that's an interesting point. So you resonate a little bit with the fact that, well, with Dennis, like, he was just sort of a wild man. Like, you had to just kind of let him do his. He was just going to be Dennis. Like, that's just, and it really wouldn't be like fair to like try to change a guy like that much. Like, you either gotta like accept the great that comes with it and put up with the rough edges, or just get someone else, right? Because to have a guy come in like that and then try to change him into someone else, it's really not fair to anyone. Even the even the world, like, that's a very unique person, so you can't like kill that spirit. And that resonated with you, and like, I feel like there's like some people do struggle through that. Like, how do they just follow their dreams, or do they sort of let some of that go and do what's sort of expected or necessary? I feel like this is where with like your writing, I feel like this comes up, I feel like, in your right, just with your MO, with the way you look at the world, with the way you operate. Like, it doesn't surprise me that you, fresh out of college, you went to a marketing agency and just left, and then became like work construction so that you could write on the side, and now they're writing really like that. Doesn't actually really surprise me when I see your writing and sort of feel like the flow and the vibe and like the heart behind it and everything. So is that just how you always have been? Like, or is this just like a point in time where you're like, nah, this just isn't working for me? Or have you always just sort of had this like internal guy, like this desire for freedom and whatever else is around there, that you just had to follow that, come hell or high water?
So again, fleshing out the whole Dennis Rodman metaphor, I think if you're, we'll just call it a Mustang, right? Those individuals make phenomenal freelancers and entrepreneurs and creatives and writers. And they can make great trailblazers within a company as long as the company is okay doing what you just said. And that's maybe setting up some gates without them realizing it, trying to keep them somewhat controlled, but really allowing them to run wild, right? But I think this is where awareness comes in. I think it's so important as a human to just be aware of your strengths and weaknesses. And a lot of times I think your weaknesses end up making your strengths even stronger. So growing up, I played organized basketball, and something I did okay. I played some D2 ball in Louisville.
Oh wow.
But one thing I heard a lot was, I'm not very coachable. And I'm not super coachable. And so I felt like from maybe adolescence to 21, maybe I was extremely misunderstood, and I wasn't very coachable, and I didn't listen. That was something I heard constantly. You don't listen, you're not coachable. And then I turned 22, and I finally decided to just step fully into maybe the shape that I've always been. And all of a sudden I feel like I kind of can set the world on fire because I'm getting to be who I was always supposed to be.
Okay.
I think that's so much of being human and figuring out this experience is we're sort of these shapes when we're born, and it takes us forever, sometimes never, to recognize like, hey, I'm going to step into that shape and fully embody it.
Yes.
Right. And so that was that. I guess to answer your question, no, it did not serve me for the first 21 years of my life.
Yep.
But when I turned 22 and really tried to just go all in on that mentality, it's been everything.
Yeah. Well, I think that's one of the things that kind of drew me to you and your work too, was like, I feel like you have, at least at this stage, you have just sort of this unashamed, just sort of a, here's who I am and here's my interests and here's how I like to be. And a lot of y'all, you are the same deep down if you're honest, and some of y'all aren't going to get it, and that's fine. But this is me, and I feel good being me, and I like being me, and being kind of comfortable with that and like unapologetic.
Mm-hmm.
Do you feel like that's how you are?
Yeah, I would say so.
Okay.
I just try to be, and of course, like there's an element to honey copy and the writing I do and poetry that is a alter ego, right? I
Okay.
totally recognize that. But I try to be overly honest with my life and my experiences and my thoughts and my feelings.
Yeah.
Because I do think like the generation that came before us, I don't think they were made up of liars by any means. But I do feel like they felt as though there was a certain way you were supposed to behave.
Sure.
And there were certain topics you did not bring up at dinner.
Yep.
And they all built these facades, and no one really knew how they truly felt behind those facades, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's just something I try not to do. Like even I try to, let's face it, if you're going into business, everyone sitting in that room that you're working with is human. And they have some pretty messed up thoughts, and they have some funny thoughts, and they have some very honest and raw thoughts. And let's not pretend to be some godly figure, because
Right.
none of us are.
Yeah.
And so I just try to be as honest as I can be. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's something that you should not lose. I think that's an edge that you have. I think it's probably part of what's behind your success as a writer. And you say you're 26, so I just feel like, over the next decade, you're going to feel that draw towards compromise probably as much as any time,
Mm-hmm.
like I'm 36, and that thing of like fitting the mold and kind of being what other people would expect of you. Like I feel that draw, like I felt that
Mm-hmm.
draw, and I tend to be a little bit more of like a free spirit, like, it's maybe sometimes difficult to coach too,
Mm-hmm.
but it's not that I'm trying to be belligerent or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
It's just that like that draw towards fitting the mold is, for whatever reason, that's sort of where the energy goes. Like, and if you don't want that, you have to actually like be deliberate about fighting against it.
Mm-hmm.
But if you just sort of go with the flow, you flow into the molds.
Mm-hmm.
There's something about life that's how it works. So I think that's something you should definitely keep, man.
Dude,
keep that edge for sure.
Yeah, I'm trying. And you brought up a good point where it almost has to be a daily sort of reminder, because if you do find some success in it, there's more to lose all of a sudden.
Yep.
I was listening to a podcast the other day that Joe Rogan was doing. I forgot who it was with, but he said something really interesting in that he can't think anymore about how many people that listen to his podcast, because it could cause him to start filtering what he says and how he behaves.
Yes.
Right. And that's something I constantly try to remember with my work, right? Which nowhere am I even touching the scale of Joe Rogan. But I was like looking through my analytics the other day, and last year, if you were to fill up the Bulls arena 50 times, that's how many people landed on my website, right? And that's not a good number to even think about.
Yeah.
If I start thinking about that, all of a sudden I have to watch how I'm speaking, right? Because when you think that you have a mic and you're talking to that many people, and of course some of those people are a lot of those people are bouncing, and not everyone's reading.
Yep.
But let's say it's just a room of 1,000 people.
Yep.
It's impossible not to tailor who you are if you're really starting to think about that.
Yes.
And then you think about, okay, like my book gets pretty risque. I'm talking about sex and drugs and alcohol and some serious demons in there. Now I'm sitting down with my girlfriend's mom over dinner, and I know she read my book.
Yeah.
And she read the sex scene with her daughter in the book that could be about her daughter.
Yeah.
Like that'll fuck you up, really starting to think on that. And so you almost have to just write to just one person. It has to just be one person. It can't be, all right, my girlfriend's mom's reading this, and I don't have a girlfriend. That was more of a, but my girlfriend's mom's using this or is reading this, or my parents are reading this, and my dad's best friend is reading this. And you just can't be thinking about that.
Yeah, but what do you do with that? Because first of all, there's two kind of key points there that are worth touching on. But the one is just the popularity and the eyeballs. So when you think about, you said the Chicago Bulls Stadium, which, are you a Bulls fan, by the way?
I'm a Michael Jordan fan.
Oh, okay. So, yeah, I was all into him as a kid too, for sure. And I was a Bulls fan, but now I don't follow basketball and haven't for years, so I don't really know where things are at. But dude, I was big into the Bulls as a kid, man, for sure. And anyhow, that stadium filled up, and then as people they exit out of a single file line, and voluntarily, they take an iPad or something that's just being handed to them, and they're looking over your website voluntarily. Every one of the stadiums reads your website. And you do that 50 times. Dude, that is so many. That is so many people. Like, when you stop and think about, well, crap, there's all these people are like reading through my website. Then you start to think about, well, how do I not piss anyone off or piss a whole segment off? How do we make sure we kind of keep what we've got here? But then when you start to think that way, isn't that the beginning of the end? Because you were thinking a certain way and writing a certain way and being a certain way, and that's what got you the Bulls Stadium times 50 to come and read to your website anyway. So when you start to think differently, I mean, it's the beginning of the end, right? Unless you reinvent or something.
Absolutely. Yeah, you lose the edge, right? You lose the edge. You lose sort of that gritty, hands in the dirt, tearing out carpet mentality in a lot of ways. I'm fascinated. I don't want to say a fan because he wasn't a very good person, but Genghis Khan. And so the reason that empire was so successful early on was that it was made up of these tribes people that were great horse riders, and they lived in this area of the world that was just nasty, and it was cold and freezing, and it bred warriors, right? And so for the first stint of his rule, they were just, to use a sports metaphor, I mean, they were the Bulls, right? During Michael Jordan's era, just crushing teams, right? Then all of a sudden, they start making money, they get rich, they start conquering, they get to see the fruits of their labor, beautiful wives and power and money. And Genghis Khan realized, oh my God, my warriors are kind of turning soft on me. So he started sending out his warriors like each year to go back to this wasteland and exist there for months on end to keep that edge, right? And I think that's sort of an interesting metaphor with what we do, in that if we aren't reminding ourselves of that mentality daily, right? Or putting ourselves in uncomfortable situations, whether it's hitting the gym and trying to kill yourself on the treadmill, or like yesterday I did a 135-pound deadlifts, right?
Yep.
When you get to 90 of those, and again, that's not like serious weight. There's guys who can do 300, 400, 500 pounds. But when you get to 90, you're saying, I want to get my ass out of the gym.
Yes.
And so I just try to create those moments where I have to double down on that mentality.
Yep.
And again, that's probably not thinking of those numbers.
Yes. Yes. But then the other thing you touched on, which is a little different than the Bull Stadium times 50, which is even, I think, maybe even more apt to sort of take the edge off, which is this idea of like what you mentioned exactly, which you're writing a certain way, conveying messages and thoughts and ideas and expression conveying the human experience a certain way. And you don't back away from the edges of that. Like you just convey the human experience, I think, in a pretty brutally honest fashion. That's beautiful writing. But when you do write about a sex scene, say, and then your dad's best friend reading it, and then like coming back to you, like being like, dude, what's up? What do you do there? Do you just be like, all right, well, look, there's a way of writing that works for me. It's my contribution to the world. It's how I can be honest to myself, honest with others. It's how I can contribute. It's my way of contributing or conveying or communicating this human experience. And this is how I do it. And lots of people are going to like it. And then lots of people, some of the aunts and uncles and friends and girlfriends' moms and stuff like that, they may not like it. They may not even get it. They may just be like, "Do what? I don't even get that."
Mm-hmm.
But do you view that as, look, there's just people out there that are just not going to get it, and that just is what it is? Or do you try to like explain to them why you write this way and all of this, or do you just kind of let it be?
I just let it be.
Okay.
It no longer is a discussion for me. And I'm super fortunate to have parents that will hand my book out to anyone they see, no matter.
Okay.
They don't. And
This
my
book?
parents, yes.
Okay. 1
and
minute,
my
please.
parents
Yeah.
are very open-minded and extremely loving, but I'd say slightly more, definitely more conservative than I am. But they're handing it out like it's game film. I'm playing basketball again.
Oh, yeah?
My dad's trying to find coaches.
Oh, that's cool.
They hand it out like that.
That's so great, though.
Right. They're truly, just amazing. And but yeah, I just don't have the conversations anymore with people on this made me feel uncomfortable.
Okay.
That's why I wrote it. I wrote it to make you feel uncomfortable. I wrote it because it's probably important that you should be thinking about this stuff. Like I have a piece in that book where sort of about intimate relationships and how sometimes as we get further along, you right when you start the relationship, it's this ecstasy, right? And tons of sex. And then you get further on in the relationship and that just goes downhill at a dramatic level. And I wrote a piece in there that made some people feel uncomfortable where it's like, I think a big reason of that is because we lose the physical touch outside the bedroom, just like holding hands, giving each other hugs, like kissing, watching Netflix, snuggling, that whole thing. And that was a weird piece for like, I'm assuming some of my parents' friends to read or like some adults to read. But that I wrote that piece not just to make people feel uncomfortable, but also like I kind of want to revisit that piece when I'm 40 and experiencing that same thing in a relationship.
Yep.
And so I don't think it's super useful to really talk about the uncomfortable aspects of the writing because again, like that's why I write.
Yep.
So yeah.
So why do you write like that? Is it a writing style that works for you? Is it just what's inside and that's sort of your angle on life and that's your honest take? Is it just, those are interesting things for you to write about? And like, why do you write on those things and just in such a brutally honest fashion?
Yeah. I think, I would say I write to figure out. That's what I've and if you ask me again in 10 years, I might have a completely different answer. But right now, being in my 20s and feeling like I know, so one thing that's interesting about being human is you have this confidence that the world is one way, and then you eventually figure out it's not that way at all, right? Writing for me is in a way sort of these dates in time as I'm entering into my 20s, like going through my 20s, eventually getting to 30s. And I think it's going to be a really interesting sort of check mark to be able to look back on and think, oh, that's what I was thinking at 26.
Sure.
Damn, you're wrong. You weren't right. You weren't right. But it's also to figure out how I feel. There's a lot of times I'll start a piece and people, my readers say this all the time where they don't necessarily know where I'm going with it. And it's because they're following just a train of thought. It's like me sitting in a room meditating or sort of mulling over an idea. And I hope by the end of it, I come to some sort of conclusion. a lot of times I don't, and that's why I end with, but I digress.
Okay.
Because I might get to the end and I'm like, oh fuck, I don't know what I'm thinking here. So yeah, I write to figure out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. How often do you encounter your style of writing out in the world? I mean, it's definitely out there, right? But you're the first person I've had on this podcast that writes like this, you know? And I don't know that many other people that write like you write, just that honest take. Is that out there and you're part of this big genre, or is it very rare?
So the conceited aspect of me would definitely say it's only me, right? But truthfully, I'm really trying to be intentional about writing, creating writing that's original to me, and really trying to create my own genre. But in reality, I'm sure there's other people out there that are doing something similar. Like right now on LinkedIn, you get on LinkedIn, and this is I could rant about this all day, so I'm not going to go long on it. But Seth Godin, one of the greatest thinkers and writers of our time. If you go on LinkedIn, it is hundreds of thousands of men trying to imitate Seth Godin in these single line broetry sort of pieces.
Okay.
Where it's just a single line, and then they do a double space, then another single line. It's very, very strange. They're just trying to copy Seth Godin. Right?
Okay. Was he big on single line and double spaces or what?
So Seth Godin runs a daily blog, and it's one of the
I knew that.
highest
I followed it for a while.
Highest read blogs in the world. And he does a lot of that. It's just simple thoughts, maybe single line spaces. And he became known for that style. But what he was doing was he was taking super complex ideas and breaking them down for the everyday person to understand, right? You see people trying to copy that on LinkedIn, and they're failing miserably because there's only one Seth Godin.
Yes.
And so that is what I'm trying to do a little bit with, if you want to call it a genre, where I am trying to create a style that, other people, maybe it inspires other people to think, okay, we don't have to write so academic, right? We can write in a more conversational and bold and raw tone. But I also want there to be only one Cole Schafer as far as that style goes.
Yes. Okay.
And I want to consider it a success if one day people are on a platform copying my style. I don't want that at all.
Yep.
But yeah, I mean, I think that the world as we're moving to internet is moving to a more conversational tone. But again, I don't necessarily think that's my style. I think it's something different. But
yeah, your LinkedIn page was what sort of, well, that's how I found out about you. And I guess simultaneously, like it sort of set the hook. That's when I reached out to you.
Okay, cool.
Because it was sort of the combination of the companies. I think I'd found out about you somehow through Onnit, and I'm not exactly sure how that was. But doing work for, not anyone can write for those companies that you've written for. So like doing work for great companies, and then also just sort of you can sort of tell when someone knows something about copywriting or creative writing, like it draws you in. And then there was sort of the third element of just this very kind of human, like you really had like like your work, your writing has a very human aspect to it. And just reading through your just very short about on LinkedIn, like I picked up on those three things and then looked up some more of your work and hit you up. So thanks for coming on the podcast.
Absolutely.
But I think that's a really great combination. Can you touch on, when the difference between copywriting and creative writing. So would you say you're doing both, or are you saying you're doing creative writing kind of underneath copywriting, or how would you think through those two?
So the main thing that separates copywriting from creative writing is copywriting is written with the intention of getting the person to do something, right? Whereas creative writing is more so sparking a thought, right? or trying to tell a story with some underlying theme. But copywriting is writing meant to sell something. My punchline with Honey Copy is pretty words that sell something, right? That's what I do for brands. Is I come up with really compelling language that ultimately is there to get that person to hit subscribe or to download the ebook or to buy ABC product, right? Whereas creative writing or poetry, that's more of, I mean, that to me feels more like a dance in a lot of ways. It's something entirely different. But I wear two completely different hats. Where by day I am full on advertising. I'm working with brands on selling their products with really fascinating language, whether it's coming up with a slogan or coming up with like a really cool 7-part sales email sequence or new website copy, whatever that looks like, billboards. But then kind of at night, I change hats and now I'm moonlighting as a poet. And that's what 1 Minute Please is. That's what my next book After Her will be. So I'm really trying to live sort of two different lives in a lot of ways because I am so passionate about both, you know, the creative writing, poetry, and then this whole other realm, which is advertising and copywriting.
Yeah, I see. Yeah. Okay, so you're doing both. So you're not necessarily saying, hey, copywriters are bad. They should be now moving into creative writing and still like figuring out a way to sell out of creative writing. It's like they're just different styles of writing. You happen to do both. Some people only do one or the other, but that you happen to do both and you do both really well. And you're not looking to not be, you're not looking to change the genre or what works with copywriting into creative writing. They're different. Right. Different expected outcomes, different type of writing. Right. You just happen to do both.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Different outcomes. The poetry definitely informs the copywriting. Okay. I mean, I think a lot of what you've read is probably my newsletter sticky notes and maybe some landing pages I've written. But, you know, something I always say, there's all these copywriting books out there by these copywriting geniuses and advertising, you know, masterminds. If you were to put Ernest Hemingway and say, hey, I need you to figure out a way to sell these shoes, he's going to write a really badass advertisement, right? It's just he was such a good writer that he wasn't dabbling in that space. He was writing novels. And so at the core of copywriting, if you can become a really strong writer, a really strong creative writer, it is going to inform a lot of that copywriting.
I see.
It's just it can't be a roses are red, violets are blue, and then it turns into this meandering poem that ends up being nothing. It's like it has to get the person to buy the thing.
Yep.
So yeah.
You mentioned somewhere that maybe it was in our text back and forth about you actually think that entrepreneurs and business people should read more fiction than nonfiction. That's an interesting thought. Why?
Yes. So if you want to become a better writer, it's one of the first things you do. And every writer, I don't care who it is, will tell you to do this. I've yet to come across a great writer that says, don't read great writing. Stephen King would read, when he was in his prime, close to 100 books a year. Now I think it's more like 70 because he's getting up there in age. But if you want to be a great writer, or if you want to just, let's say not even a great writer, but you're an entrepreneur and you want to hone your writing skills, it's really important to get good taste, right? I mean, I think at the base of being a great podcaster or an entrepreneur, first and foremost, you have to develop a good taste on what products sell, what makes a good podcast episode. Because until you have that taste, you have nothing to judge what you're doing.
Yeah.
Right. And so what I see a lot with business books is they're just really poorly written, right? A lot of times the person on the cover isn't the one writing it. It's a
lot of times.
Yeah, they've hired some book agency, which there's nothing wrong with that, but it's a ghostwriter and it may not be the best ghostwriter and they're not super well written, right? And but when you read something from Hemingway or Steinbeck or Rupi Kaur or Virginia Woolf or some of these fiction writers, I mean, you're reading. It's like watching Michael Jordan game film. Like you're watching the creme de la creme of talent put out their greatest works of their lives. And so that's why I say, if you want to be a better writer, make sure you're reading fiction, because if you just say, all right, I'm not into fiction, it doesn't help me with anything, you're immediately removing 75% of the greatest writing that exists in the world. So that's my stance.
Yeah, that makes sense. And you basically can't outsource fiction, correct? Is there ghostwriting for fiction, or is that very uncommon?
It's pretty uncommon. There's rumors that some really big writers like Nora Roberts, who's putting out like 10 books a year, there's rumors that she is a ghostwriter. I don't know if it's true or not, but I think it's much more prevalent in nonfiction.
Yes. Okay. So with fiction, you're at least kind of getting it straight from the horse's mouth, so to speak. And then the other thing with nonfiction too is it's sometimes they just need to add more words, they need more pages, so now you're reading a whole bunch of fluff. Like with nonfiction, sometimes you might be better off just reading the cliff notes and just now you have it. But the reading experience isn't always great. I feel like you can tell if I used to be kind of a mindset where if I'd start a book, I kind of have to finish it, like to just check it off in my mind.
Yeah, it feels like not sneezing, right?
You have to
sneeze and then you're like,
that's exactly it. But it's like if there's not a compelling reason to keep reading the book, if it's not enjoyable, or you're at least not learning some decent things in an enjoyable fashion, I don't have a problem setting the book down anymore and just moving on.
Life's too short.
Yeah, it really is.
Absolutely. I think that's super wise. And I mean, if it's a book that you feel like they had to add 50% of fluff in to meet a word count, then yeah, you're right. I mean, just read the cliff notes.
Yeah.
But fiction's just something different. I mean, I could go on forever. Have you read Gates of Fire? I see it on your bookshelf back there.
Yeah. So I have read half of that book. This was a few years ago.
Could you not get into it?
Well, not really.
Okay.
Which was sort of weird because I think you're like the third person to mention Gates of Fire in the last year. And
it is so good, man.
I don't know why I remember where I was sitting in our last house when we were reading it, and I did like it when I was reading it, but I can't remember why I stopped. So
yeah, I mean, it's by Stephen Pressfield, which Pressfield wrote The War of Art. Have you read that book?
Oh yeah. Love that.
Stunning. Yep. But I think Gates of Fire is almost better than The War of Art because it's sort of his ethos encapsulated in fiction. But if you're into that like warrior mentality, I mean, you got to read that book all the cover to cover. It's amazing. But if you don't want to read that, a piece of fiction I tell everyone to read is City of Thieves by David Benioff, who was the showrunner for Game of Thrones.
Oh, okay. Okay.
I've seen Game of Thrones, and I think that book will go down in history as his greatest masterpiece, over Game of Thrones. But it's short, maybe 200 pages, and most people I recommend it to read it in 1 to 2 settings.
Okay, yeah. City of Thieves. You jot that down, Andrew? I forgot I don't have my notepad and pen, which I normally have. But so kind of bringing this back to like what works with communication. So obviously I'm doing the podcast and would like the podcast to be something that's, beneficial to listen to, and it flows well, and it's interesting and informative, and it's conversational, and it's not boring, and like those types of things. And so like you're saying reading fiction would help with that. It would help kind of, because another thing that I've just like in general want to improve my communication over time. I've always been fascinated by good communication, speaking, writing, whatever it is. Like the ability to craft words in a certain way to change hearts and minds that's really like, that's so cool when you think about it. Like that's underselling it, but it's such a powerful thing. Like animals don't really have that, at least to the level that we have. Like to be able to put words together in a certain formation, using certain pauses, and then speeding it up, and then emphasizing different things. Like the ability to like change, like craft words in a way that changes hearts and minds it's a really interesting, compelling thing. So like in general, I'm always looking for kind of ways to improve that, whether it's an email. Like I just want the communication to be decent.
Mm-hmm.
You're saying reading fiction helps with that.
Yeah.
Why do you come back to Joe Rogan for a second? Why do you think it's so popular? What is it about his podcast that's so compelling? Because he has a crap ton of listeners.
Yeah.
And one of the things I appreciate about him is he doesn't really want to know like the downloads. He doesn't spend time thinking about that.
I don't think he does. What do I think so popular about Joe Rogan?
What makes it work? Like, what is it about his communication or the way the podcast flows that you think makes that work?
I think what makes it work is every time I listen to one of his podcasts, and maybe my only critique, and I feel weird giving a critique because he is arguably the most popular channel in existence today, but maybe they go a little bit long. I mean, I think he can figure out a way to create some sort of constraints around it, but
they don't go as long when he's not as high.
Right.
I think.
Yeah, you're exactly right.
The higher he got, the longer they would go, I think.
Yeah, they for sure. But it almost feels like you are a fly on the wall listening to Elon Musk talk with Elon Musk's best friend. And we don't see that side of people a lot of times, right?
Sure.
Post Malone talking with Post Malone's best friend. I think Joe Rogan is world renowned at being able to get someone to kind of tear down their walls a little bit, kick their feet up, and have a candid conversation about their actual thoughts, not from a filtered, oh, can I say this? Can I not say that? He is just tremendous at that. And so when you hear people on his podcast, they're diving into some really fascinating conversations, but I think they're not just fascinating conversations, they're honest conversations.
Yes.
When I hear Elon Musk say something on his podcast, I'm feeling pretty confident that he truly means it. And it's not like a big PR team sit behind him saying, oh, you can't say that. Let's change how we're wording that. I think Joe's just exceptional at that, truly.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think he's good at kind of like cutting through the bullshit and stuff. And then he's a great communicator himself. I mean, he can really communicate an idea or a scene or a story really well. And then he has a lot of interesting guests on. I want to ask you a little bit more about copywriting. What have you noticed that, well, what works and what doesn't, basically? Because not all copywriting is the same. And your writing works, obviously. So what is it that when you set out to craft a message that's designed to draw action, whether that's sign up for an email newsletter or buy something, whatever that call to action is, like what are the check marks or the mile markers that you're kind of, or the filters that you're kind of running your thought through to make sure like you kind of craft this in the direction that it should go?
Yeah. Man, there's so much there. I want to give more actionable stuff. I mean, we could touch on improving your writing, but I think more just actionable stuff. Something I recommend a lot of copywriters do, or just anyone who's wanting to write better copy, is when you're writing a blog or an email or a landing page, right? Let's say you're investing 5 hours in writing that landing page. You need to make sure that 20% of that time is spent specifically on the headline of that landing page. Or an email, you need to make sure 20% of your time is spent specifically on that subject line. Article,
20%?
20%. And here are my thoughts on that.
Dang.
So like one out of 5 hours, right? And again, like if you're writing an email, you're probably not spending 5 hours on it. It's probably an hour. So like just figure out the math there. But there needs to be a massive chunk of time on that alone. And here's why. Those are like miniature billboards for that article. And something a lot of people run into is they'll spend 5 hours writing this beautiful blog, right? And they think, okay, since I spent all this time writing it, the angels and muses are going to collect around me and they're going to drag people's eyes over and say, oh, they're going to want to read it now because I spent that time.
Yep.
Then they'll spend a minute coming up with some half-ass headline that ends up feeling clickbaity, right? and they're wondering why no one wants to actually read the article. And so my thoughts are, if you can't get someone to click on to open up the email or to click on to read further down on the landing page, then there's no point to even have written it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so that's why I think it's so important to just spend a massive chunk of time on that headline. And so a lot of times what I'll do is I might write 20 headlines for a sales page, right? I'll write 20 headlines, and then I'll step away for maybe 10 minutes, come back and read back through those headlines and kind of put a check mark on, okay, these are the 5 that are really, really strong. And if it's a big landing page, right, then I'm probably passing those headlines around to just see which ones are resonating, right? And again, like I know that strategy is not necessary, like that. The second part of that strategy, where you're passing them along to friends and colleagues, that's not necessarily realistic for the go world of content we live in today. But a way to dramatically improve your writing is, if you're writing something, just make sure that the mini billboard advertising that piece of writing is as strong as you can make it. And so I always segment out that 20% amount of time to just really dial in that headline, because I mean, people just have such short attention spans nowadays that they're not gonna read something that's not compelling.
Do you write the headline first and then the copy, or do you write the copy and then come back and give it a headline?
So I'll write the headline and then I'll start writing the copy. And generally, the headline I'll start with is rarely what I'll finish with. So as I write the copy, there'll be headlines that come out of that copy where I'm like, oh wow, that's actually really, really dope. And I'll write it down in the margins, or write it down on a piece of paper, or float it up to the headline, like in the comments section in Google Docs. And I might come up with 10 of those by the end of it. And then I'll do like a brainstorming session at the end where I like set a timer and I'm just trying to write as many down as possible.
Yep.
And again, it's looking at them and just kind of cutting the fat on like, oh, these are really bad. And eventually hopefully you'll land on 3 where you're like, these are all really strong. But yeah, I think that's an immediate way to improve the copy. Another sort of hack, and I'm not necessarily into hacks, period, but something I have found that works is changing the CTA copy. So like the button copy. A lot of times you see buy now, shop now.
I noticed that on one of your landing pages, or maybe both for your books.
Right.
You changed the copy on the call to action button.
Yeah, it's kind of weird. And I treat them like a wink to the reader, right? So a lot of times you'll read maybe a button copy in my email or my landing page or something I've written, and it's kind of like a wink between me and the reader, because all of a sudden they were expecting it to be buy now, but somehow like I pulled in a theme in what I was writing as like an inside sort of joke or comment in that CTA button, right? Because we've been on the computer long enough. We know that a button down at the bottom of a sales page is where I go to buy the product.
Yeah.
So why are we telling people to buy now, right? Why aren't we using that like super valuable real estate to say something fascinating, whether it's like an inside joke or so I think that's in my emails. I found that increases click-through rates a ton. So that's something I do with like all of my clients. Some of them fight me on it. Actually a decent amount. Well, not a decent amount, but some people fight me on it, the more traditional sort of marketers.
They fight you on having different words in the call to action buttons?
Yes. Yeah.
They don't fight you on having multiple CTAs, right?
No, but having different words, they'll really fight me on that.
Really?
I was working with a really prominent, I'll just say ketogenic snack company the other day, and their marketing manager was just trying to fight me on every single CTA copy. And I finally just said, just test it. Like, just test it. If it doesn't work, then you never have to send the email again. And so we wrote 3 emails. They went with my call to action buttons. And it ended up being like the second performing product launch for those emails, like in company history.
No way.
Yeah. In the CTA button, there's nowhere does it say buy now for $9.99 or like get your like shop now, you know.
Okay.
It's just all coming up with just those little winks, you know, down in the CTAs.
Yes. So. Okay. So then they'd click on one of those CTAs and that's going to take him to the shop. That's going to take him to where they can actually buy the product, right?
Right. Because
we all know that's where we're going at this point. That's your point.
Yeah, that's my
20
point.
years ago, people would be like, "You want me to do what now?" But now we all know you click on this because you want to buy.
Exactly.
And so you don't have to just say, "Click here to buy now."
Right.
You sort of get that. Yeah, that makes sense. That makes total sense. The other thing that you mentioned just now that I never thought of, never heard actually in these terms, but it makes total sense is this is something I'm seeing, probably people have been doing this for a long time now, but I just kind of started noticing it. I feel like more in the last couple of years where on a landing page, you have copy and then a call to action button and then more copy, another call to action button, more copy, call to action button, and like having them maybe say some different things. But the point is you don't have just a whole bunch of copy and one call to action button, like having them throughout. And, what stuck out to me that you mentioned is those CTAs are sort of like a wink, which is sort of that is how it reads. Like it's like, here's some copy, kind of like wink. Do you want to just go ahead and buy now? Here's some more. Like that makes sense.
Yeah, it is. It is a wink, and it's pulling in a theme from the story. So, I'm just trying to like give an example. That way, I'm not just.
By the way, do you have one we could pull up? A landing page you like, for this book?
Yeah, I mean, I think if
let's pull up 1 minute, please.
Yeah, if you go to like 1 minute or not 1 minute, please. If you go to Honey Copy, you'll be able to.
Okay, I think we've got a link there.
Yeah. But yeah, so I'll do it there. Or but okay, so you brought up something interesting with like the above the fold copy, right? Let's say you are writing. So the old school style was you write this massive sales letter that goes on forever, and then at the bottom it says, if you want to get your hands on this product, you can do it by mailing in this slip or like clicking this button. But now, readers' attention spans are so short that there's no reason not to have, like, each section almost needs to be treated like a call to action, like a funnel, a funnel in miniature.
Yes.
So it's sort of, if you have a massive sales page, you might have 5 funnels throughout that entire page that sort of act as one giant funnel, all pointing the reader to that same kind of spot at the bottom of the funnel, and that's like to buy the product.
Yes.
But as a reader, just think about the last time you went through a website thinking about like buying some sort of product. Like right now, I'm turning a spare bedroom of mine into like a study, and I bought this bamboo floor mat. I'm not reading everything about that bamboo floor mat from the top of the sales page down to the bottom.
Right.
I've really probably decided that I want to buy that thing within the first, I don't know, like 3 to 4 seconds of being on there.
Yes.
I'm like, I'm interested enough to like at least hit the buy now button, at least go in and choose, kind of look at what the pricing is.
Exactly.
So readers are making decisions, and website visitors are making decisions to buy, or they're interested in buying at different places on that web page. So it makes no sense to like not put a button near the top, because they might get 2 sentences in and be like, take my money.
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
So
exactly. All right. So here we have, which one is this, Andrew?
This is
Honeycopy.
honeycopy.com.
This is honeycopy.com. Now, is this is this your website, or is this the landing page for the book?
Nah, this is my website.
Okay. Andrew, go to 1 minute, please. Do you have a link there for that?
Yep.
All right. So
it's a video.
Scroll down a little bit. And okay, so that's
I know what you're talking about.
That's not the landing page, though.
If you go back to honeycopy.com and then click books,
there we
go.
go.
What you're talking about?
Yeah. All right, there. So 1 minute, please. So scroll down. Yeah. So when I'm not writing advertising, I'm moonlighting as a poet. 1 minute, please, is a sexy matte black collection of hard-hitting, heart-throbbing short stories, creative writings, and poetry about life, love, creativity, and finding purpose in a world that at times feels wildly impossible to find purpose in. You had me at poetry. Bang. There's your first CTA.
Yeah, first wink.
Right there.
Yeah.
So there's a little bit of a wink, because it's like someone could read that and be like, dude, because first of all, if they're going to come on here, they already know something about you, right? I mean, they didn't just stumble on your landing page. So, and then it's like, that might be enough to sell right there.
Right.
So why not?
And so why are we writing 2,000 words?
Exactly.
Where the CTA is at the bottom.
So there you have like a wink, but then just keep scrolling, Andrew. So Do you actually have? Can you scroll back up a tiny bit, Andrew? I saw a line there. So do you actually have a line? Is that intentional?
With all my landing pages, I'll sort of separate sections with like a really light line.
Oh wow,
that's kind of like my style. And then with clients, those will actually be different sections within the website.
Okay,
right?
gotcha. So you found kind of that. You have that chunk of content, and then the CTA, and then a bit of a line, and then more. So yeah, keep scrolling down there, Andrew. So then you're going to have more copy. Warning, the shit is heavy. There's a picture of the book. Keep scrolling down. Now you have more copy here. Heavy in the best kind of ways, like a bag full of Nutella heavy. It's so great, man. Keep scrolling down. And then another CTA. So like what... and
then again, like just to read it, so like Nutella not included. Again, another wink. Where it's like now the reader feels like they're in an inside joke, which they are. I mean, so much of good writing is just being thoughtful and caring about the reader and not making them feel like they're 1,000 people. They're just one of thousands of people reading this. And so that to me like connects with the reader because it's sort of this wink like, yeah, you caught on to the joke, right?
Yes. Yeah, I love it. Keep scrolling down, Andrew.
Oh, that's the
Oh, that's that. Yeah. That's that one then. Okay. Yeah. All right. Yeah. So, I mean, it's compelling, man. So when you sit down to write that, are you know that you're going to have 3 or 4 CTAs on this landing page.
Mm-hmm.
You know that the goal is to get people to click on one of those CTAs. That's the goal of that landing page. Click on one of those call to action buttons. And then you're just going to just kind of start writing like in a way that's interesting and compelling and sort of speaks to an individual and not the crowd.
Mm-hmm.
And you're just going to start typing. Is that kind of how you go about that?
For me now, when I'm writing for Honey Copy or my own brand, right, that it's as easy as that. But let's say I'm working with a new brand for the first time and I don't know what their voice is. One of the first conversations I have with them is it's coming up with who they are if they were a person, right? So it's coming up with their brand persona, right? So let's say we're coming up with your brand. A lot of times brands approach this strange thing where they're writing from 1,000 different voices as an organization rather than viewing themselves as this single person.
Yep.
And if we look at to any brand like an Onnit or Bowflex or Lululemon, there's really like there's a person we can reach for and say this sort of embodies who the brand is.
Mm-hmm.
And so you ask really strange questions like what, if you were at dinner, what type of conversations would you have if you were a person, right? What music would you listen to? Would you be more edgy? Would you be chill? Are you more religious? Are you conservative? Are you liberal? Where are your stances on all these things? Suddenly you create this persona and then you do the exact same thing with their readers. A lot of times what brands do is they say, oh, our target market is women between the ages of 25 and 40. Which makes absolutely no sense because a woman who's 25 years old is completely different than a woman who is 38, right? Same with men. And the reason being is they're just in completely different times of their lives. And they might have different interests and they might have kids or they might not have kids. They might be married. They might not be married. They might be divorced, right? And so that now becomes, let's take that target market and turn that into a single person. This is your buyer, right? And again, we're asking those same questions. What type of conversations do they have at dinner? Do they work out? Do they not work out? What social movements are they passionate about? Maybe they don't give a shit about it, right? Mm-hmm. It's just them as a customer. And now when you sit down to write the sales page or the blog or the email, it becomes a conversation between your single person as a brand with a single person that is the reader. This is called the ideal reader, right? When Stephen King would write every single one of his books would be written to his wife. It wouldn't be written to the millions of readers who read his books. It would only be written to his wife. And fortunately, his wife had incredible taste, so he wrote just amazing books. Mm-hmm. But he was writing with an ideal reader in mind. Every brand should be writing as a single person with an ideal reader in mind. And then suddenly it takes all the bullshit out of it because now it's just a conversation between two people.
Yes.
And a lot of times I get compliments with Honey Copy on, I feel like you're writing to me. Mm-hmm. I feel like it's so intimate. I feel like we're having a conversation. And that's intentional because it's just me writing to one person in the room. Mm-hmm. And people are similar, right? And and they feel the same things. And so when you're writing to one person, all of a sudden that now feels like it resonates with thousands of people. And so that's generally how I will like start the approach to writing, writing a sales page or whatever.
It makes sense. What's just occurred to me now that I never thought of it is like successful writing like that, like sales copy and copywriting for different brands. It has some similarities to being an actor, which is like an actor. It's like here's the role I need to play, and yes, I'm still Cole Schafer, but they want me to play, this Superman character or whatever it happens to be. So while the camera's on, I'm really not Cole Schafer anymore. I'm Superman. You know what I mean? Like, and that's who I embody. There's kind of some similarities to when you're copywriting for various brands. It's like you kind of put yourself in, and now you are the voice for that brand, and you're kind of speaking on behalf of that brand. And 3 hours later, your tone, it's going to change entirely, or might change some for writing for another brand because that brand is different entirely. There's just some similarities to like acting that I had never really thought of.
Yeah,
before.
I mean that's a great point. I didn't really think about it like that, but yeah, it's almost like you're playing dress up in a way.
Yeah, it is. Yep. Do you feel a sense of accomplishment when you write great copy and you know it's great copy, and then the success either is what it is, like, but that's sort of like the second thing. Like for you, it's just like you write until you're comfortable with it. And then it kind of just is what it is. Or it's like you write, you're comfortable with it, but you just got to know if it really worked or not.
So there's a line there. So when you're a freelancer, which most of what I do is freelancing, and I think that a lot of times freelancing gets a bad rap. I mean, you almost view it as like your uncle who lives in your grandma's basement, right? Running the web design company, but they really, it's floundering and it's not doing well. And it's really like just a cover up for them to pursue their dreams of being like a comic book writer, right? And one day they're going to recognize that genius. Freelancing gets a bad rap because it can be just like a beautiful career where you're hired in to like come in to this brand and create magic, right? I mean, that's a gift in a lot of ways. And so I take freelancing very seriously. And with that, sort of bringing back in like the whole Mustang mentality, right? When I'm hired to come in and make magic for a brand, like whether it's a landing page or coming up with a slogan, there's a certain amount of conviction that needs to take place in like the art or the work that I'm creating. Early on in my career, I sort of had this like rollover mentality on like, as soon as the CMO speaks up and says, yeah, I don't dig this, right? Or they want to change everything about something I wrote, it would be a rollover because they were signing my paychecks, right? They were paying me at the end of the day. And so a lot of times there are two different kinds of freelancers here, where one freelancer says, at the end of the day, like I am just a hired gun and they get to call the shots, which I think there's some truth to that. Then there's the other freelancer that says, I've spent 10,000 more hours studying this field than you have. And like, I believe in this stuff like it's religion and I follow it. I'm obsessed with it. And so if you're going to hire me in to come in and write a landing page, don't change 90% of the landing page I wrote. And so early on in my career, I'd roll over. Now it's more this approach of, if I'm writing you a sales page and you think that you're going to change 50% of it, I will kill the landing page, not take the paycheck, and walk away from the client completely.
Really?
Yeah, like I just don't do it anymore.
Because you don't want your work to be trampled on that badly.
Yeah, I don't want it to be trampled on. Like imagine if, and not comparing myself to Steve Jobs, but imagine if like Steve Jobs put out a laptop and then every single customer were able to put in their 2 cents and change every aspect of that laptop.
Yes.
It'd be a piece of shit.
Yes,
it would be
sure.
disastrous.
Yep.
And so you might write a landing page and put it in front of a brand, and now all of a sudden 10 people who have never written anything besides like a best man speech feel that they can trample on it and like change the words within it, right?
Yes.
To the point where now you don't have what you were hired to do. You have 10 voices who have put in their 2 cents, and you have 50% of what you've done.
Yes.
As a writer, right, who takes your work really seriously, you have to decide who you want to be in that moment. And in that moment, do you want to be the person that collects a paycheck and shuts the fuck up and says, all right, you can use it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you know on your conscience that they're using something that isn't going to work because it's coming from 10 different voices who know nothing about writing, Or do you step up to the plate and say, hey, we're either running with what I'm doing, and sure, we can tweak it by 10% if it makes you happy, but I'm not going to put out something that I don't believe in, right? And so, yeah, a lot of times nowadays, I just that's a conversation I have before we start the project.
Oh yeah,
yeah. It's just like if you're one to hire me to do this, you're hiring me to write this the way like I think it should be written. And of course, it's going to be collaborative. Of course, you're going to create constraints.
Yep.
Of course, you're going to make recommendations on like exactly what you're going to want in there.
Mm-hmm.
But when I put out the product and we're going to completely change how it is, that's just not the business I want to be in.
And you're saying that you're not interested in having 50% of it change because you just know deep down it's not going to be as effective. So it's actually more that than a pride thing. Like, hey, don't tamper with 50% of my work. I'm sure it's a little bit of both, right? Like, your work's good and it's valuable.
Mm-hmm.
And so in defense of your work, you can't have 50% of it change. But there's also this aspect where the effect, you just know that the effect is not going to be there if they tamper with 50% of it. So it's a little bit of both.
Yes, it's a little bit of both. Of course, it's a pride thing.
Mm-hmm.
Let's flip scripts. Let's say like this podcast, every single episode you put out, you have to put it in front of a board of 10 people who don't podcast, who've never been on a podcast, who have never done an interview on either side.
Is it that bad? Seriously?
I mean,
there's no way.
It's close to that bad. There's definitely people there who have writing chops,
right?
But let's say we were to do that, and they might make great recommendations. Let's say all 10 people made 10 really solid recommendations on how you could have improved the podcast episode. Suddenly, the podcast episode, in my opinion, loses its magic because there's 10 people's hands on it. It no longer becomes art. It sort of becomes like this weird Frankenstein podcast episode where, oh, we better cut in this place and we better add in that weird jingle because like Ben really wants to add in the jingle. Yeah. And at the end, we're definitely going to want to reference the Ben's cousin's floundering website agency because we want to kind of give him some traffic. And all of a sudden, it's not your baby anymore.
Yes.
And it's not like true and effective and authentic because it's not just coming from one person.
Yes.
Right.
Okay, so that really resonates because I'm not willing to do that even if the 10 people giving critiques is like 10 great podcasters.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, it's just at this point, it's and I'm curious to hear what you think about this because like I think maybe this comes from like this Mustang part of me that we've talked about just a little bit, which is like, here's what I want to do, and if it works, great, and if it doesn't, I'm willing to accept that.
Mm-hmm.
But what I'm not willing to do is to do a version of this and then have it run through 10 different filters, have it all chopped and diced, and put it out, and then see. It's just you lose the genuineness, the authenticity, the magic.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm okay. Look, I'm not saying there's magic on this podcast. I mean, if there's not magic, I'm willing to face the reality of that. And then we just won't keep doing it. You know what I mean?
Right.
But I'd rather take that risk than go through a bunch of 10 different filters and a bunch of edits trying to push the magic into it because that's just not something I'm interested in spending my time doing. So, but now I will say this though, if we're doing this podcast and, weeks from now, it's you or some other communicator who's got some chops, whether that's writing or speaking or podcasting, whatever it happens to be, if they listen to this episode or any and like, hey man, here's an idea for you. Like this is what you could. I'm game. I'm totally game. I mean, after every episode, I'm like, Andrew, what could we have done better? You're like, I'm cool with that. I'm just not cool with doing the thing and then have it all sliced and diced.
Right. And but again, I think that's like a different conversation in a way because. Okay, so David Ogilvy, greatest admin of all time, wrote a book called Confessions of an Admin, or of an Advertising Man. And he wrote in there, he addresses at the beginning of the book, he goes, you're probably going to think I'm kind of conceited throughout this book. And I am, but please know that it's like selectively so because I've spent my career in advertising. I suck at golf. I suck at making Excel spreadsheets. I can't cook. I can't, he writes all of these things down, right, that he's really, really bad at. I kind of view our crafts in a very similar light in that, does it make sense to collect constructive feedback from a super talented copywriter or podcaster or editor or someone who has experience in that world? Absolutely.
Yes.
I will line up to listen to that all day long. But I don't think it makes sense for people to outstep sort of like move out of their territory to create. I'm not going to walk into a chef's kitchen and say, this is how you should go about cooking a steak. And so I think that's kind of, that plays into two routes there, where one, we need to be, as people, right, when we find a lot of success in a specific genre, we need to not become arrogant and think, okay, well, since I've kind of created a pretty good following in writing, now all of a sudden that gives me the ability to go out and critique Kent on his podcast, right? Because it doesn't. Writing and podcasting, they just aren't similar, right? So there's that. But then I think also when we're in our genres, we have to be careful not to know what feedback to listen to, right? If it's someone who's never written anything besides an email in their life and they want to come to you and say, oh, I don't really like this part of your landing page, listen to it. Don't be an asshole, but I wouldn't necessarily lose sleep over it unless it's someone who has been in the game a long time, has written 100 sales emails or landing pages, and now all of a sudden they're saying, hey, this doesn't work, and here's why.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Okay, so then now if you are in the position of the person who's hiring the freelancer to write some copy, because this is something where with just having different businesses and ventures in the past, like I have often been like OCD on what's written. And I'm trying to step away from that a little bit and just use writers that I trust and then just let them do their thing. But is that how you would suggest for the people that are the CMOs or the people hiring the content writers is put a lot of time and attention on hiring a good one that you can afford, but a good one, and then just letting them do their thing? Is that sort of where you see the biggest kind of input from the CMO or whoever's hiring the writer, is just figuring out who you want to hire? Like that's your biggest decision. Who do you want to hire? Right. From there, you just kind of have to let them go. Is that how you would recommend?
Yeah. So I think it's, again, all about the conversation on the front end. So a lot of the frustrations I shared there, that those tend to stem from, one thing, because my writing does have a very specific voice. I'm going to say 90% of the brands that I work with say, we're cool with you writing exactly how you want to write it, because they followed my newsletters or they've read enough blogs, they've read my work, and they just trust me, right? When you make that comment, the work I put out there's not a lot of room anymore for you to say, oh, I don't like this, because you handed over the reins to me.
Right.
Now, if you as a business owner, come to me and say, hey, Cole, I love your writing style, but here's what I'm wanting to do with this article or this landing page or this slogan. This is the feel I have in mind. And you put together some sort of brief where you're creating constraints, right? That becomes super easy to measure, where at the end of that engagement, once I turn in the work, we both can sit down and say, did you deliver or did you not? Right? Because you've created those constraints on the front end. So I would either say, if you're a business owner and you really love a specific writer's work and you're totally cool with them just going all in on their voice and style and doing their thing, then you have to be okay with on the back end saying, all right, I kind of gave them the reins and I'm cool with where the sled's going.
Yeah.
But if you tend to be a little bit more particular, which I totally understand, because, like, again, businesses and startups are entrepreneurs and founders' babies, right? I just think it's really important on the front end of that engagement to say, hey, this is exactly what I want verbatim, and I'm terrible with words, but, like, this is what I'm looking for.
Yeah, okay.
And then at the end of that, you can pretty easily define, did the copywriter succeed in what you're wanting him to do, or did he fail?
Yes.
And I'll also add, like, I know there's elements of that where I kind of sound like I'm a hard ass, but there's been a week ago, I wrote a email sequence where I didn't feel like I delivered, and the client wasn't super happy, and it was a $2,900 project, and I just said, I won't accept payment on it. We won't do it. And he didn't like the copy, and I didn't necessarily love the copy, and it just, from the beginning, it kind of felt like that date you go on that you're set up with your friends, and you feel like it's bound to fail, and it's kind of uncomfortable, and we don't share the same ethos, and that's what it felt like. But I think we both really respected one another, so we were going to go through with it, and then our intuition was correct and it just ended up being shit.
Huh.
So I don't accept payment there because I don't feel like I delivered. And then he might be able to say, oh, Cole didn't necessarily do the best job for us, but he can't be mad at me because he didn't write a $3,000 check.
Right.
You know? And so I will also say that as much as it's important for the freelancer to have conviction, they also have to have the awareness to say, yeah, I shit the bed here.
Yes.
You know, let's figure something out.
Yes, exactly. So when that happens, is it because you just weren't vibing with the other party? Is it because their voice and brand you just really couldn't embody? Or was it you were just having a bad day?
So like back to the dress up metaphor. There's some, I mean, Brad Pitt can play a lot of roles, but there's some roles he can't play.
Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
I think as a writer, you definitely, there are, Ogilvy said this in his recent book. He said he's proud to say that he's walked away from 3 times the amount of clients that have fired him. So I think like as a freelancer or as an agency or anyone doing creative work, there's a lot of, there needs to be a conviction of where you say, I see who you are and I see what you're wanting to try to create here, but I'm just not the guy for the job.
Yeah. Okay.
And it doesn't mean like you're bad or I'm bad. It just is not a right fit. In that particular situation, I just wasn't listening to my gut, you know?
Yep.
But there have been many times where there might be some money on the table and I walk away because the last thing you want to do is enter into an agreement and then you feel like you're just taking someone's money,
Sure.
you know, in hopes that you can perform, you know?
Yep.
So.
Yep. That makes sense. Yeah. The position of being, say, the owner or founder of something and you feel like it's your baby and other people are writing the content, like, I've just been there like multiple times. I know what that feels like. And then it's also like, then they're bringing in like probably what is really wise and shrewd and like effective copy. But it's like, that doesn't sound like if I talk, that doesn't sound like if I'm talking. And now I feel like you're making me a little bit more hype. Like that's where it always goes. It's like, I'm not that hypey. Like
I'm a little more casual.
I'm a little bit more casual. Let's get rid of some exclamation points here. But then like, I mean, in a lot of those cases, they were good writers, you know? And so would you suggest that you just try to like stretch yourself maybe even a little bit beyond what you're feeling comfortable with and just kind of trust the writer? Or do you just, as the owner or the founder, just kind of express what you're feeling to that writer? And then if they want to tweak some things, they can tweak some things. But if they feel like, nope, I hear you. You're just, you know, you're freaking out a little bit, but no, this is good. This will work. Like just kind of be open and honest with them, kind of let them make the final call? Or how would you kind of give advice for the founder or the owner on whether to make force changes or just go with it?
So there's an element of I do think like founders and entrepreneurs, they need to have some balls to a degree where if they want to stand out in all of these websites that are out there, they have to be open to saying something that might be a little bit edgy, right? Or a little bit more honest than they would like it to be. But I do think that is very different than maybe them feeling as though the copy is forcing them to pretend to be something that they are not, right? And sometimes with copywriters or writers or graphic designers, anyone, right, that they just might not have the style to really get that brand where they want to go. And so I just think the founder to a degree needs to kind of have some awareness to say, okay, is this me being sort of like resistance, what Stephen Pressfield talks about, where resistance is like this beautiful compass. I mean, if I wake up tomorrow morning, the thing that I don't want to do most is probably the thing that I most need to get done that day, right? Like today it was working on this landing page for a client that I was struggling with. I was putting it off, writing some poetry, drinking coffee, sending out a email to sticky notes. And then finally I'm like, okay, I gotta do this thing, right? Yeah. Resistance is a beautiful compass in that way, where if I feel like there's a lot of wind blowing at me in this direction, I don't want to go that way. Good indicator that I need to go that way.
Yep.
I think founders need to be aware of that on like, if copy is challenging them from a resistance standpoint of like, ooh, that kind of hurts a little bit. That's a little bit of a painful direction for us to go in because it is a what if, but it feels true.
Yes.
they need to go in that direction.
I see. Yeah, that makes sense.
But if they feel like they're throwing on a mask, then nah, just find another copywriter.
Yeah, that makes total sense. Let's go back to Cole Schafer pre-22.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, even the copy of this book, like, there's some of this darkness and expectancy and humility kind of all wrapped up, and it's beautiful, man.
Thank you.
Like, where does this come from?
Just the aesthetic and the design.
Yeah, like what made you? Like, let's go back even pre-22. Like, I feel like you look at the world a pretty unique way, in a way that not everyone does, and you're unwilling to back down from that, which is really, I mean, we need more people like that, in my opinion.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I don't know exactly where it came from. What I will say is that growing up, I think I was made fun of a lot throughout my life for maybe being overly sensitive, right? And I think, like, to a degree, maybe being a little bit more in touch with, like, my softer, more feminine side. Like, I'm wearing leopard shorts right now.
Yep.
And I remember, like, one time I was really interested in this girl that I was seeing, like, in my early years in high school, and I made a Starburst bracelet for her, where I, like, took a bunch of Starburst wrappers and looked up this way to, like, kind of do this weird origami to make this cool, like, interchanging bracelet, right? Kind of cool when you look at it now. You're like, oh, my wife would swoon, when you're like 20s, 30s, 40s. But when you're 15 years old doing that, that's some weird shit, like for people who are more immature. And I remember, like, giving this to her, and a week later, the entire cheerleading team at that high school found out about the bracelet. And I suddenly was, like, kind of viewed as this, like, really weird, feminine, I'm going to use the gay word, and there's nothing wrong with being homosexual or whatever, but when you're a straight man and you're maybe perceived as that because of maybe a more softer gesture that you use, right? It can be a little bit debilitating in a weird way, just like maybe how a gay man might feel if he's forced to be straight in a family that's not cool with him being gay, right? It's this weird sort of dichotomy of, like, who your true self is and how you're maybe perceived, right? And so I think, like, I always felt like I thought deeper, or was more sensitive in a lot of ways. And so when she, like, shared that with a cheerleading team, I remember I was in this basketball game, a year later, right, playing varsity, and one of the basketball players, we're playing her school, and one of the basketball players, like, made that comment where he's like, do you remember that bracelet you made so-and-so? Like, you're so gay for that. He was just, like, talking shit to me. And I remember it broke my heart. Like, I was, like, playing, and it almost, like, just threw that game to the wayside. I was like, damn. And so as I got older, I think I tried to, in a lot of ways, bury that side of me, that more sensitive side, that more feeling side of me. Because I think, I grew up in Southern Indiana, where, like, to be a man, in a lot of ways, there is a cookie cutter sort of blueprint. You need to be masculine. You need to probably not talk too much about your feelings. You need to be make sure you follow those sports. Drink beer. Don't drink, like, cider.
Right.
that'd be weird.
Yeah.
Don't do that. And so I kind of, like, built up this idea of, like, what makes a man. And it wasn't until, like, my early 20s where I felt like I was able to return to that sort of person that I was, that more sensitive person. And, like, I wrote a piece in that book even where it probably a little bit more conceited than I would like it to come across, but it just talks about, like, how now, being the sensitive guy makes me 6 figures a year because I can write for brands being that sensitive guy.
Yes.
I get flown across the world to, like, work in Belarus with startups being that sensitive guy. And it's just like, once I finally doubled down on that person who Cole Schafer was all along, and that is the dude that's wearing the cheetah shorts just because he likes it,
Yes.
When I finally was okay with being that person, I did feel like I was able to finally, like, create some really compelling work.
Yes. Okay, so This makes a lot of sense, by the way. Like, if I had to guess, I would say, based on what I've read of your writing and everything, it's like this guy went through some pain somewhere, and it's not 100%, but it's like that. Like, if I had to bet $100, like that's what I'd bet it on.
Yeah.
So, is that the pain, the being misunderstood for the artistic side, the creative side?
Yeah, a lot of my writing is dark, and I try to maybe start dark. And then you sort of edge yourself to the end of that tunnel and say, okay, like now we're at kind of the light, like there's some hope, you know? So yeah, I'd say there's been painful places along the way.
But even here's what I would say on you use the term kind of the feminine side, which is an interesting, let's come back to that because I think that's an interesting point. But here's what I would say, well, like we just sort of like subconsciously justified your personality and your strengths with the fact that they're making you 6 figures a year, which is awesome. Like, congratulations. Like, that's like that crowd gets pretty small, pretty dang quick. I mean, you would know that.
Yeah.
So I think that's wonderful. But that shouldn't be the justification for your personality. You know what I mean?
Right. That's a great
point. Shouldn't we be like later just be like, you know, now we see that Cole's great because like that's his personality and he's got that creative and artistic. And if you want to use the feminine term for some of those things, fine. But he's justified because like he is being true to himself and he has friends that love him and family that loves him and people around him and he's contributing to society and like he's being his own person. That's the justification. Screw the 6 figures. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
But you know, I'm not taking away from the 6 figures because like that's a big deal. And you're right. Like those traits did contribute to that success. But like, heck, if you never got to the 6 figures, that should have zero bearing on your personality and like your worth as a person. You know what I mean? Like people just need to accept that. And now we're kind of coming back to the mold too, aren't we? Because like, why would that girl react that way? Like 15 years old, give or take. Well, she's reacting that way because there's a norm. Like there's a norm, there's a common way of acting if you're 15 years old and you're a dude, you know, and then there's always variances from that norm, like on both sides and up top and bottom, like, there's always variances if people are honest, but they sort of slip into that mold because they don't want to be kind of called out like you were a little bit with that experience. And I think that's unfortunate. Like we need to start like treating people for who they are as individuals and not for the norm that we think they should fall into in that period of life. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah. No, that's a really interesting thought. And you brought up something. I mean, I appreciate you kind of bringing up the idea of like, even at the end of the road, if you aren't successful financially or like from a business standpoint, it doesn't mean you shouldn't pursue that. I think unfortunately, like with pop culture, I mean, I'm a huge fan of like rap and R&B and hip hop. I mean, that is like kind of the line there where it's like, you know, you're young and you sort of got the kick shit out of you, like the shit kicked out of you from like an emotional standpoint, whether it's like your teachers telling you couldn't be shit or, you know, and fortunately for me, like I grew up under great parents and, you know, my parents did really well and they were great role models in a lot of ways. And so some of my demons early on were more from like some things they couldn't control, you know, that money or like education or status like that, it couldn't help save in a lot of ways. Right. So I think like I've kind of created some demons in my past to like add fuel to that fire. Like, okay, now I can make some money because I was this way. But I appreciate you bringing that up because I think it like kind of forces me to call bullshit on myself a little bit where, okay, what if that money wasn't there? You know, like what if that's not a thing?
Yeah.
Because I think that's important. Because there's a lot of kids like maybe who grew up really, really poor, like having their own demons, and they might not be the rapper or like whatever that looks like. It's good enough to be the science teacher. It's like affecting, like impacting like tons of kids in their youth, right?
Yes.
So I do think there's that element, and I think it's just maybe being like just forcing yourself to be just super true to who you are. but I think there has to be like some sort of fuel there. You know, there has to be a fuel to a degree of like why are you choosing to be the truest version of yourself?
Exactly.
Especially if like those around you who feel uncomfortable when you're that way.
Yep, totally. And on the success front, like that's something to be applauded. Like that's something that you deserve congratulations for. That's something to feel really good about. And that's something to like keep going. You know what I mean? Like whatever success you have now, be even more successful. But the hope would be that if you weren't that successful, even financially, that we would be sitting here talking and you would still be saying the same things about how like you were misunderstood, but you've come to grips with it, and now you're on your own person. And you know that affects your writing. Of course, it's going to affect your writing, your work, and your art. Basically, of course, it has an effect on that. And you've come to terms with like that's who you are, and you're okay with that, even if you're not making much money at all. Like so, like if there's someone listening to this podcast, because I feel like every listener resonates a little bit. Like it's going to be different things for every single person listening, but all of us, like we all have sides where it's like, oh, maybe I should tone that down a little bit, or maybe I should, change this, or I wish I was different here or there. Like we all have that. And so just to kind of like hear your story and, hear you come to grips with different things and then realize, well, it's not the money that justifies it. Like it's just you coming to grips with, well, you just being comfortable with being your own self. Like that's the justification, And other people that love you for who you are, like that's the justification.
Right.
And from there, it's, it is whatever it is on the finance side.
Yeah. I mean, I think to use a metaphor, I remember when I was a kid and, every year we would dress up for Halloween in these costumes, right? You'd do these costumes. And it's funny how like the first hour you were hype as hell to be in that costume. Yeah. Like, oh yeah, I get to be a ninja this year. Like my brothers and I we're all Japanese, right? So like we grew up like being super fascinated in like samurais and ninjas. So for every Halloween, one of us was a ninja. And it was like kind of hysterical because like it would just the ninja costume would kind of just change hands. And so, but like the first hour of Halloween, you were stoked to be the ninja, right? But by hour 6, if you walking around and you're sweaty and you smell and like the mask is on and like it stinks and you can't see,
you've had a dozen Snicker bars.
You're ready to get the hell out of that costume, right? Imagine like living your entire life in that costume in a lot of ways, right? That to me is kind of what that felt like, maybe growing up in a weird way where I wasn't able to be like the truest version of myself. And so like the Starburst bracelet thing, when that comment's made and I realized, oh my God, the whole cheer team, like half like the girls on there, I think they're hot as hell. They all think I'm a weirdo, right? Because like I did this bracelet thing. There's a part that the sensitive side of you sort of is forced to shut off. You go super into basketball, you go super into sports.
Right.
Fast forward to today, like 3 months ago, I was taking this gal out to have drinks. And if I were to do that even 3 years ago, I wouldn't have done this. But like today, like we're texting, making plans, and I'm sensitive enough to like just text her and be like, hey, this is what I'm wearing to the date. So you have an idea to like what to base your attire off of that date. And like she sent me this beautiful line back where she was like, oh, that literally killed me that you're like that thoughtful to do that. Right. And I kind of had that like Halloween, rip the mask off.
Yes.
I can be myself, like look at like the victory you just won for being who you wanted to be. The thoughtful guy that like tells a girl, this is what I'm wearing. So you feel comfortable going on to the date, like knowing what you should be wearing.
Yes.
Right. I think that's like a really small example of like what your life can become when you suddenly can like just embrace that side of yourself.
I think it's a really, really good example actually, because if that's not well received, you have to like maybe you still go on the date and maybe she changes her mind and maybe she kind of repents and realizes she was an asshole if she didn't kind of respond properly to that. But like I think that's a good example because if that text isn't properly received, you can't, there's no future there.
Oh,
you know what I mean?
Exactly.
Like that's not going to work.
Exactly.
So you may as well just be yourself and figure it out on the front end. And because, you just play that scenario out. And this is why it's such a great example because you can play this scenario out with your friends. You can play this scenario out with, I mean, just the whole nine, where you like to live and how you like to set up your house, the type of music you like to listen to, the type of friends you like to kind of resonate with, like all of that. You can't just keep that costume on and just like, not send the text, even though you want to. Like you feel like that would be a good thing, and so you go ahead and do, which I think is fantastic, by the way. And then it's gonna be up to her then, or the other party, and like whether they understand that or not. And if they don't understand it, that's just sort of what you want to say in like nice ways, like, well, just screw you. You know what I mean? Like that's, then this isn't gonna like work long term. You know, but you're not willing to like alter your instincts and your reactions. You can't. I mean, that's just, there's no future there.
No, you're exactly right. John Steinbeck, Grapes of Wrath, some really amazing books. His son wrote him one day, this was long ago, and it was this letter about like being in love with this girl and sort of like all the weird turmoil that comes with falling in love with someone and maybe not being sure if she loves you back the same way, or as strong, which I think is like an interesting thought of like, sometimes I feel like falling in love is weirdly as painful, or at least as tumultuous as falling out of love, right? I think it's like in a weird way, this strange kind of contrast. But anyways, towards the end of his response to his son, he wrote a letter back to his son, and he just said, like, give it your all and be there, but also recognize that like nothing good gets away. And that's just like a metaphor and sort of a meditation I try to live for with like my life on like clients or readers or opportunities or love interests or friends, relationships, whatever it is. As long as you're being your most authentic self, like nothing good gets away. Truly.
Yeah, that's really powerful. I was just talking to someone last night, an older, established, much more wise, accomplished gentleman, and he made the comment that God doesn't waste pain. Like he went through a really painful experience in his life, and he kind of felt like his life was over, and this was years ago, and it turns out his life wasn't over, and he's flourishing big time, and that was just kind of like someone had told him, I think it was his pastor had told him that at some point, like God doesn't waste pain. It's the same thing, like nothing good gets away,
Yeah, exactly.
But the idea, all right, let's come back to the feminine thing, because this is something we were talking with Mary June Miller, who I don't think you know, but she was on the podcast, and we were just talking through something that she's been interested in, which is this idea of, you might have to help me here, Andrew, but it's this idea of masculine and feminine characteristics and kind of embracing, like if you're a female, I guess you would tend to have more feminine characteristics, and embracing that.
Polarities,
yeah. And I just remember like the one thing we talked about was this idea of like masculine tends to be more structured and ordered and maybe controlling in some ways, and feminine is more passionate and chaotic, and I don't know if beautiful was a thing, but the passion one, for example. And my question to her was like, who says passion is feminine? You know what I mean? Like, and I have no problem. I don't care if it's passion happens to be feminine or masculine, but it's like, can't I just be passionate and that's a characteristic? Like, if I'm passionate, which I am, is that saying that's a female or a feminine attribute? You know what I mean? Like, can't passion just be passion?
Right.
So your comment about some of the feminine characteristics, do you think that's an accurate way to look at it? And I don't know if it is or not. I'm not pushing back. I mean, for all I know, it is an accurate way of looking at it. Or is another way to look at it like artistic or creative, or it's just who you are? Like, is there actual, is there like an objective tie to feminine characteristics there? I'm curious what you think about that.
Yeah, I mean,
for you in particular with your personality and stuff.
Right. I would say to a degree, it's maybe, maybe viewing some of that stuff through like a more traditional lens of, for years, we sort of viewed men in this one bucket and women in this other bucket. Maybe men were more career-driven, ambitious, aggressive, spoke their mind. There's sort of those ideas in that bucket, which I would say is accurate from a traditional viewpoint. Fortunately, like we live in a world now where women don't necessarily, or not even necessarily, women don't need men to raise a family, right? They can work the really great career, and they can bring up boys and girls like on their own, and they don't ever have to have a spouse. And so they can easily be super driven and ambitious and career driven and all these aspects of themselves, right? So they are that bucket that we've misinterpreted as being masculine is no longer masculine. It's just like, this is what people can be. They can be aggressive, career driven, ambitious, right? But I think it's maybe a little bit harder at times for men to reach their hands in that other bucket that has been traditionally but incorrectly feminine.
Yes,
right?
It is.
It's incorrectly feminine.
It is harder.
But it's like we view women as being more sensitive, right? But the truth is, like, I've dated a lot of women who are a lot less sensitive than I am.
Yeah.
Like, and like I've dated a lot of women who, I think you used a terminology of like, not volatile, but I forget. Chaotic, right?
Yeah.
I've dated a lot of women who are a lot less internally conflicted and chaotic than I am, right?
I mean, you're describing my wife and I.
Right. And so I think it's like taking the buckets, let's spill them out onto the table where like all the fish and oysters and lobsters and shrimp just like go all over the table. And then it's just like, take your pick. Like, choose who you want to be.
Yes.
What's most true to yourself. And for me, that is someone who is very career driven and aggressive, but also is like deeply conflicted and in a lot of ways deeply emotional and sensitive. Right?
Yes.
So I use the feminine and masculine terminology from a traditional standpoint, not necessarily indicative of like who women and men are today.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. And it's interesting because when we think about like, when we talk about like like male and female kind of roles in the past, so like, I guess we should probably put a timetable on it, but I don't know, what would you think? Like, just think of like the 50s, would you say, or like the 60s, 70s even, I don't know, 40s, like in that period of time, let's just say.
I mean, I would say even up into the 80s.
I would agree with that. Yeah. So let's just say kind of from that, which I know, that's a pretty broad range, but the 50s to the 80s, it's like when you look at, that is sort of the stereotype where like the men are more masculine and the females are more feminine, okay? I don't completely disagree with it, although I'm not sure that I'm totally convinced, because when you look back at it at a time period of like, I can't tell you what my great grandpa's name was on either side of the family. I don't even know.
Yeah. Which I think takes pressure off of us today. Right. Yeah. Where it's like our grandkids probably aren't going to know who our names, like what
That's
our names
true.
were.
Yeah. I great grandkids. Hopefully our grandkids do.
Yeah. I should say our great grandkids.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I don't know anyone like from when I look back on that period of time and I come up with like stereotypes, if you will, which I know is a dangerous term, but like we got to categorize somehow here for this conversation. I think a lot of our categorization actually comes from like leaders or people that had greater notoriety. Okay. So sure. When you look at like people that had greater notoriety, and they happen to be a male leader, sure, that you're probably going to get more driven and task-oriented and controlling and those types of things. But I don't know that that's an accurate representation of all of the men in that period of time. And I don't know here. I mean, I don't know anything about any of this stuff, by the way. I'm just thinking it through. But so I grew up in the Mennonite tradition, which is like, are you familiar with Amish, like horse and buggy?
Yeah.
And Mennonite is like, it's this kind of the same theology. We had horses, we had cars and like normal houses and everything like that. So that's kind of like we've changed directions since we're married and everything, and we're not part of that tradition or culture anymore. However, I know people in that culture or tradition, and the reason I'm going to say this is because I feel like that culture and tradition has closer ties to like the 40s and the 50s and the 60s than like maybe like you and I do right now. You know what I mean? They're less modern.
Right.
So it's more
conservative.
Like they're more conservative. It's more like what was going on in the 40s and the 50s and the 60s, like at that time, like they just kind of carried on to today. Okay. So if that's true, which I'm okay if people say that's bull crap or it's not true, but I think there's something there. If that's true, then they're really good like sample, like a good sample size or a good like test piece, because if they have kind of carried on with like the more traditional feminine masculine characteristics of like the 30s, 40s, and 50s and 60s into today a little bit better, which I would argue that they probably have. Like they have a closer tie to that. Well, being from those communities, I can tell you, like, there are very sensitive guys in those circles.
Mm-hmm.
Like, probably as sensitive as you and I.
Really?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Oh, yeah. And
as you were explaining that would not have been my assumption.
That's probably not what you were thinking. You know what I mean? And it wasn't necessarily what I was thinking, too, until we started talking through this. But no, there are very sensitive guys in those circles. And there are women that are very controlling.
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of interesting when we think about like these, air quote stereotypes. Like, I wonder how accurate these stereotypes actually are. And what if men and women through history were just as sort of a casserole, if you will, or, like on either side as they are now.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Today. Yeah. Because nowadays it would be just ridiculous to make an assumption of saying women are one way and men are this other way.
Right.
In terms of like, especially careers and like, it just wouldn't make sense. But maybe throughout history, and I've had this false assumption that like throughout all of human history, it has been this way. Right. And maybe there's been a lot of this flip-flopping, which would be really interesting to dive into.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, it would be interesting.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, it's an interesting conversation for sure. 1 minute, please. What's this book about?
Man, that is about, well, you can read the back.
The back says, to be candid, I'm not entirely sure what the fuck any of this is about. But if you have a minute, I do think I can make you feel something.
Yeah.
This book is about feeling something.
It's about feeling something. I think it's about kind of confronting everything we, maybe have been, I'd say it's about confronting the elephants in the room, in your own life, whether it's shortcomings with yourself or your relationships or your creativity or maybe the ambitions that you had for yourself that aren't quite there, or you haven't lived up to. I think it's confronting a lot of those demons and putting lipstick on them, cutting their heads off and mounting them on the wall and saying, I kind of overcame that shit, I would say that's what the book is about.
Is it, it looks like every page
is its own story. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. That's why
every
I said
page...
1 minute, please. I kind of wrote every one to be a single minute sort of excerpt. Yeah.
Yeah, that's very cool.
Thanks, man.
I mean, look at this. 3. Let's see. 3. So that one page is 1, 2, 1 through 7. Okay.
Yeah, and that's like a short story.
I see.
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah. So
gotcha.
some of them go a little longer.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah,
man. Andrew, can you pull up his link to the book? Is it Quarantine Dreams?
Yeah, Quarantine Dreams.
Quarantine Dreams.
Uh-huh.
Did you write that? I think is there a link there, Andrew? Mm-hmm. Did you write Quarantine Dreams
during
based on the quarantine, or had you already written it and then you changed the title?
No. That was based on
that was for quarantine.
Yeah, I had a really strange. It was a weird quarantine for everyone.
Oh,
so I
dude.
feel weird saying it was a weird quarantine for me. It was like,
well, no, but it was more weird for some than others. I mean, that's true.
It was just awful for everybody. But I was seeing this girl in Denver, Colorado, who in a lot of ways, like I thought I was gonna marry eventually. She was kind of the one for me, and which we had like a really weird happenstance where we actually grew up in Southern Indiana together and lost touch because she moved away and I moved away, and for like a decade we were kind of existing in this weird limbo mode where we were following each other on Instagram but not really talking.
Sure.
And like had moved on with our lives and we're dating other people, which I hate Instagram because I feel like Instagram is this petting zoo for our life's romances, right? You can kind of watch it from afar and see. Oh,
yeah, it's not wrong.
Oh, I see what old Sarah's doing over there.
Yeah.
She had her first kid, and so that's what that was. And then all of a sudden, we got back in touch. And one day, we were almost like pen pals, like talking every day. And one day, I messaged her and just said, "What are you doing Sunday?" And she was like, I don't know what I'm doing Sunday. She goes, I think I'm getting my hair done. And I said, well, this might be strange, but I'd love to like fly out and take you to coffee.
Yeah.
And she said she like threw her phone against the bed and freaked the fuck out and was not about it at all, because it was so. I mean, that's like a strange text to receive.
Sure.
But finally, she swallowed like her pride a little bit and got courageous and said, "Yeah, come out."
Yeah.
So like I flew out. I meet her at this coffee shop in the Low-High district in Denver, Colorado, called the Black Eye. It's a super dope coffee shop. And we see each other for the first time in a decade. And a trip that was meant to be like 24 to 48 hours turns into a week. And then it turns into like us having this year-long relationship together.
Oh, wow.
That was stunning. I mean, just like one of the great loves of my life. And then the quarantine hits, right? And you're in long distance, right? And now all of a sudden you have to go from seeing each other every 2 weeks, where you're flying out, we're kind of exchanging seats on the plane, to now we have to go 3, 4, 5 months without seeing each other. And it just died. It was like watching like this rose just die on the stem. And so Quarantine Dreams was birthed from that in a lot of ways, that pain and that suffering, and like in this weird midst of like all of this strangeness existing away from conversations like these with like complete strangers. Like I've never met you before, but there is an energy that comes from like sitting across from you, looking in your eyes, like having this type of dialogue.
100%.
And so that's what Quarantine Dreams was just like that pain in the early stages. And that's morphing into my next book after her, which is like purely like relationship shit, you know? But yeah, that's Quarantine Dreams.
If you scroll down on that, here, can you make that a little bit? I can't quite read that, Andrew. We need to get a bigger monitor over there. Here we go. The husband was at dinner with the wife, and the wife was staring at her phone, and the husband asked the wife why she was staring at her phone, and she put it away, thinking to herself, because I would rather be someplace else. Then later, the two were at home watching something on the television, and the husband was staring at his phone, and the wife asked the husband why he was staring at his phone, and he put it away, thinking to himself, because I would rather be someplace else. And finally, one day, the world began to cough, and it didn't stop coughing, and everyone was asked to stay inside, and the husband and the wife were staring at their phones, and they asked one another why they were staring at their phones, and in unison, they put them away, thinking to themselves, because we'd rather be someplace else. And then scroll down, Andrew. There's nothing else there. That was my point. Like, what the hell? What are you? You can't end that like that.
Yeah. It was my hopes was to get people to hit the "I want this" button and continue the story.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And is that the one where you're selling it for whatever people want to pay?
It's free. Yeah, you can. It's whatever you want to pay. So people pay $0, right? And then you have other people who pay. You know, I had someone that like had followed my writing forever and paid $100.
Oh, that's cool.
So it's really cool. It by no means was super profitable, but
sure.
It sold a lot, like quite a few of those copies, and was a nice kind of continued conversation from 1 minute, please.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. And so was the book primarily about this this love relationship with
my
with
next book is primarily about that. Okay. After her, this was more so, I think, like the pain that came from that and the quarantine and confronting a lot of like, not maybe confronting some of that pain, but not necessarily confronting the source of it, you know?
Sure.
Whereas After Her will stem heavily from that relationship.
Okay. Gotcha. Yeah. And like, just out of curiosity, like the next book after her, is she going to know that book's about her, or it's not going to be that obvious?
No, I'm actually changing my all poetry under a alias. So I'm doing a pseudonym just because I think specifically for that reason, you know, like a lot of these relationships and friends and people, and like a lot of the things I write about might not even be about me. It might be about like my best friend who went through a really bad breakup.
Right.
But I'm writing it in the first person because that connects a lot more with the reader.
Yes.
But I also want to create that space too, where that book's heavily inspired by that breakup, but it's also heavily inspired by like everyone who's ever gone through a breakup, because I think we all experience the same emotions and feelings and these weird moments of insecurity. So I'm changing that alias. That way it creates that separation. Also not protect them, but just create some space between like these people who mean a lot to me, and maybe not like protecting their privacy in a way. Yeah.
Yeah. Makes total sense. Total sense. Well, this is great, man. I really enjoyed getting to know you. This is a lot of fun.
Dude, this was awesome, man.
Yeah, this was fantastic. Congratulations on your work. It's great work. Keep doing it. And what else do you want to talk about today?
Man, I don't know. I mean, I think it's really powerful to say, hey, you gotta end the conversation on one note. I'm trying to think of like something super powerful. You know what? I wrote a piece the other day that I sent out to my newsletter that really resonated with a lot of people, and it was sort of this meditation on trading out your youth and your life for something, right? Where a lot of us don't realize, like, the moment we turn 18, we're forced to make this crazy shift where we go from expecting the world to give us something to the world now expecting something from us, right? And that number's arbitrary, right? It might be for the super rich suburban kid, it might be 27 until his parents cut him off. For the kid who grew up under stranger and more harsher conditions, it might be 15, right? But there's an age somewhere in there where all of a sudden we have to make this cataclysmic shift where we are no longer expecting something from humanity, but it's now our job to give something back to humanity, right? And I think that in a lot of ways is where dying begins, where every single breath we take, every day we live, every moment we spend on earth is moving us closer to this end point, like in our lives, whether that's 30 in a freak accident or whether that's 90 dying in a bed around like surrounded by our loved ones. We don't know when that is. But I think that the trade we make and this beautiful aspect of being human is we can trade our lives and sort of that death of ourselves for the change we're wanting to make in the world. We can leave the world a better place in a lot of ways.
Yes.
And so I think when you put it like that, all of a sudden, you know, maybe getting stressed out about being cut off in traffic, or, you know, I just adopted like a baby pit bull, and she'll piss me off sometimes because I can't control her, and she's hard-headed, and she's literally a Mustang like I'm trying to saddle. It puts all that in perspective where let's chill out on that, and instead let's find this craft or this vision we want to, this fingerprint we want to leave behind on the world after we leave it. Like, how can we leave the world a better place?
Yep.
And that's what it is to be human. And I think God or the universe or whatever you believe in, I think they create gravity and aging to sort of remind us of this, of our mortality, right? They create gravity creates, like, becomes this scalpel that creates lines in our faces, right, to show us our aging. And they sort of melt us to the ground, where all of a sudden, no, wow, I didn't know my skin was wrinkled like that or sagging that much or whatever as you get older. And it's to sort of turn our eyes inward, like in ourselves a little bit, and decide, okay, I can't control maybe how I look, right? I can go to the gym and like work out, but at the end of the day, I can't control that I'm starting to lose some hair up top here. I can't control that things are thinning out some. But what I can control is like this inside of myself, right? This wisdom and this emotion and maybe this muse and this talent that I can turn around and like sculpt the world into a slightly prettier image because I was here. And that really resonated with a lot of people. And I think that that's what I'm trying to do with writing. It's writing to figure out, but I think it's also writing to make people aware of like their demons, their bullshit, the elephants in the room, their short amount of time on earth, so that they can then say, all right, I'm taking the baton and I'm fucking running.
Yes.
And that's what I would say I'd leave people with. It's just run, you know, because you don't have a lot of time.
Yes.
Yeah.
Dude, I love that, man. You know, you encounter like certain people in life that like they just have a gift. You know what I mean? And it's evident to me like you have a gift. So keep using that gift.
Thanks, man.
I mean, I'm a fan. Andrew's, you know, we're on your side, man.
Thank you, dude.
If you need anything, you know, we're rooting for you.
Absolutely.
Thanks for coming on the podcast, man. I thoroughly enjoyed this. Yeah, it was fantastic. It was good to meet you.
Yeah, good to meet you.
And by the way, when did you move to Nashville? Been here a couple years or not even that long?
No, I was here for a year. Moved to Chicago to kind of chase the big city dreams.
Okay.
Realized like how important community is, which there's just no community like the community I've sort of been able to like fall into here in Nashville, move back, bought a home, and I'm here, for good. I'm gonna travel.
Sure.
Maybe one day I'll have like a cool second little spot somewhere, but Nashville is where I'm building things.
Yeah.
So
fantastic.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for being on the podcast.
Absolutely.
Appreciate it.
Yeah. Thank you.